Lawyers of Reddit, what are the craziest yet legal last will and testament stories you had to deal with? Story 1. The Great Stork Derby was when a wealthy Canadian left a substantial amount of money to whichever woman had the most children in the 10 years following his death. It was upheld through numerous court battles, and 4 women tied with 9 children each. 2 women were also given smaller payouts. One had 10 children, 2 were stillborn, and the other had more than 9 kids, but a few were illegitimate. The guy also had some other interesting things in his will and was a known practical joker. Story 2. Where I went to college, there was an oak tree that was deeded to itself in a man's will. Now called the tree that owns itself. It sits in the middle of a road and you have to go to one lane to drive around it. Story is that the man loved the tree so much as a kid that around the same time he died, in the 1830s, he gave the tree possession of itself. This technically wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but the county and local populace has accepted it and takes care of it. The original tree actually died, and the current one is a product of the one of the acorns of the original. Story 3. Military lawyer here had a young client come in for a will before deployment. He put in a request to be buried in blue jeans, a Chris Jericho t-shirt, and his replica WWE Championship belt. Happily, this airman didn't meet any misfortune on his deployment. Story 4. 2 sons of really wealthy couple go to the family lawyer to have the will read. Lawyer is super nervous. He has known them both since they were kids. One son gets the entire inheritance and the other gets nothing. The explanation was that it should be passed through the blood relatives only. So that was the day he found out he was adopted. Edit. A lot of people asked what happened. I only heard of this through a friend, so I don't have the full story, but the reason I went to a lawyer, the person I know, was that it was being contested, so the disinherited son had to contest. I believe over the amount, not that his brother wasn't willing to give him anything. Crazy. Why even adopt a kid if they don't mean to treat them as their own in the end? I don't understand some people. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but paralegal. We had a dying client in a hospital change her will by recording it on a smartphone. It set a precedent and made the local paper. The lawyer in question has the page from the newspaper framed in his office. Story 6. I work for a lawyer who does wills. We've had a lady put in her will that one of her adult sons was not to receive his share until he visited a dentist and the other son lost 70 pounds. Another lady put in her will that she wanted her cats cremated with her when she died. Told her that's not going to happen. Human remains and animal remains do not get cremated at once. So she settled on cremated separately and joined together, then buried together. Typically, wills are about 10 pages for the average person. We had a lady who had 56-page will. She detailed everything from her house to people, wooden ladle to blank, toilet paper holder to blank, magazine basket to blank, etc. for every single item in this lady's house. We had a man put in his will that his family was to go to the zoo immediately after his burial that day. We thought that was more heartwarming. We had a lady that told us to put in her will that she wanted to be buried on her property next to her husband. She lived in a small rural property. Totally illegal to have human remains buried there. Refused to tell us whether her husband was cremated or not and had dictated that she did not want to be cremated. Edit, her husband had died 5 or 6 years prior, so it's not as though it was 50 years where things like this may have been a little overlooked. We work with many people from a certain religion. A lot of people we do wills for leave at least 90% of their estates to the church instead of their families. Story 7. I worked at an attorney office and a little older lady gave her house and her belongings to a bus driver. The bus driver was nice to her and would help her. We were all waiting for hell to break loose when her family found out. Story 8. My dad is a lawyer and a friend of my grandpa, who was in his 80s and had end-stage cancer, made his will. He was a big fan of weapons and wanted to give them to my dad. He's a fan too. He left him 2 shotguns, a Glock, and a revolver. My dad told him it would be better to write it in the will because my country's law says that you can only own up to 5 weapons at a time. My dad already had 4 at the time, so he would have to give some up. But if you inherit them, it doesn't add to the limit. So they made a testament and he gave him the weapons except for the revolver because it was his favorite and he didn't want to give it away yet. My dad instantly knew why but didn't say anything. 2 weeks later, the guy shot himself with the revolver. He still hasn't got the revolver because police still has it. He never told my grandpa that he knew, but he didn't want to take the guy's chances of ending his life on his own terms instead of waiting for the cancer to win. Story 9. Not a lawyer, but I had an experience with this years ago. Rich uncle of mine, real crazy, not in a good way. He would come to visit us when we were kids, maybe once every 10 years. Last time he did, he brought us to a Denny's. He met my brother in an airport, was there for an hour before he got on another plane and went home. When he died, he had no friends. He had driven his wife to basically drink herself to death a few years prior. He left his entire estate to an Elvis impersonator. Everything. Story 10. Estate lawyer here, I could tell so many stories. Sisters fighting over deceased brother's dining room table, ending in an accusation that one had murdered her own husband. True believers who were convinced the rapture was imminent and only saw the value in completing their estate plan when I explained the mess those of us left behind would have to deal with, including their stuff. A guy who got married days before his death to a longtime girlfriend, long story, did a will, disinherited several kids but not all, and somehow everything worked out okay with minimal disagreement. Several stories where a family member is a lawyer who practices in another area of law in another state, or doesn't practice at all. Guaranteed craziness. I could go on and on. It's the absolute best line of work, super fulfilling, great stories, get to know families, and walk meaningful paths alongside of them. Story 11. There's a famous UK case. One of the richest men in the world at the time died during the journey between his solicitor and his country estate, all because he forgot his glasses. Took the lawyers just over 100 years to spend the entire estate in legal fees. The name of the case escapes me. I think you're thinking of William Jennings. He died in 1798, and the lawsuit over his will ended in 1915. Story 12. I mean, it's not that crazy. It's depressingly predictable. Rich old aunt, the only one in her huge family with any money, having been a doctor on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She set up a living trust to take care of her poor relations in the Philippines to continue as a death trust whenever she died. Her favorite niece was in control of the trust, and, of course, the niece was responsible and even-handed and never, ever embezzled any of the money to herself up as a newspaper publisher and concert producer and media mogul with new expensive cars and lots of first-class Pan-Pacific travel. Nope, not her. Of course, the trustee did all of that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars missing, and an unholy mess of stifling through money transfers and property purchases in 3 countries. The niece also had a bigamous marriage to some loser in the Philippines. Her legal husband in North America was bedridden and dying slowly, to whom she sent buckets of her aunt's money to build a luxury villa. She vehemently denied such a relationship existed. She also had photos of the wedding on her Facebook page. Not the smartest embezzler out there. From where I sat, in the attorney's office representing the poor relations trying to stop the trustee's embezzlement, the craziest part of it was that after years of fighting, we finally got complete financial disclosure for the trust on December 22nd. And it was such a Christmas miracle that I almost put off my Christmas trip to New York City to gleefully pour through every poorly redacted line of it. Also, we had the rich old aunt's ashes sitting on our bookshelf for years, since the dispute about what to do with her remains was part of it all. Story 13. I was a witness to one where the lady wanted to make sure her daughter divorced her husband when she had no intentions of doing so, if she wanted her part of the estate. Thankfully, that is not legally enforceable, so nothing came from it. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time to watch our YouTube video. If you find our content helpful and enjoyable, please click the subscribe button to stay updated on any new videos we share in the future. Thank you once again, and we hope to see you in our next upcoming videos.